For over a decade, we thought we knew the story of Jenny and Sumit. We dissected every fight, every tear, every family intervention. We believed it was a grand, dramatic tale of forbidden love. A story about a significant age gap, a clash of cultures, and a son's struggle for independence against the iron will of his traditional parents, Sadhna and Anil. We were wrong. We were so devastatingly, profoundly wrong. The truth, which has now erupted in a scandalous court case that is shaking the foundations of the reality television world, is that everything we witnessed was a lie. It was all a meticulously crafted performance, a decade-long piece of theater designed to cover up a secret so dark, so greedy, it's almost impossible to comprehend. And it all began with a single TikTok. Just a few weeks ago, a video went viral. A woman, her face partially obscured, claimed to be a relative of Sumit's first wife. The video was a montage of photos. A young boy, around 9 years old, with Sumit's eyes, Sumit's smile, an uncanny, undeniable resemblance. The caption was a dagger. The son Sumit Singh and Jenny Slatin don't want you to know about. The internet exploded. Before Jenny or Sumit could even process the tidal wave of hate crashing down on them, Sumit's parents, Sadhna and Anil, released a statement to a major Indian news outlet. Through crocodile tears, they confirmed it all. The boy was their grandson. They had been fighting for years, they claimed, to protect him from the influence of that American woman. If you think that's insane, buckle up, because what I'm about to tell you is a story of betrayal so profound, it redefines the very meaning of family. A decade of lies is about to unravel. Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell, because you are not going to want to miss a single second of this. The public narrative solidified almost instantly. Sumit was a monster, a deadbeat dad who had abandoned his own flesh and blood for a woman old enough to be his mother. Jenny was the wicked homewrecker, the catalyst for a family's destruction. And Sadhna and Anil, they were suddenly vindicated. All those years of relentless opposition, of screaming matches and emotional blackmail, it all made sense now, didn't it? They weren't just overbearing parents, they were righteous grandparents fighting for their lineage. The world's sympathy, which had so often been with Jenny and Sumit, swung violently in the other direction. Headlines screamed from every tabloid. 90-Day Fiancé's darkest secret, Sumit's hidden son revealed, and parents' worst nightmare comes true. Singh family fought to save grandchild from American lover. Every past conflict was re-examined through this new damning lens. Sadhna's infamous decision to move in with Jenny and Sumit wasn't a desperate attempt to control her son. It was a grandmother's valiant effort to stay close to the family that held her grandson's father captive. Their constant threats to disown Sumit weren't about culture. They were about a father's unforgivable sin. The narrative was simple, tragic, and utterly believable. And it was the biggest lie of them all. Because while the world was busy condemning Jenny and Sumit, the real story began to leak out from the shadows. It came from an anonymous source, a person claiming to be a paralegal, recently and abruptly fired from the prestigious law firm representing Sumit's first wife. This source, risking their entire career, couldn't stay silent any longer. They came forward with a story so horrifying, so twisted, it makes the public narrative look like a fairy tale. The source was clear. The fight was never just about a child. It was about money, a staggering amount of money, $2 million to be exact. According to this insider, whose claims are now being corroborated by leaked documents and internal communications, the extremely wealthy family of Sumit's first wife had established a massive trust fund for their daughter's firstborn son. This wasn't just a college fund, it was a fortune, a $2 million nest egg intended to secure the child's future for life. But this trust came with a catch, a clause so specific and so draconian, it would become the catalyst for a decade of suffering. The clause stipulated that full control and disbursement of the $2 million would only be granted to the child's legal guardians if the father, Sumit Singh, was living what the trust defined as a respectable, traditional life. And what did that mean? It meant a life approved by the first wife's powerful family. It meant being in his arranged marriage, living a conventional life in India, and upholding the conservative values of their social circle. His relationship, an eventual marriage to an American woman 30 years his senior, was not just a family disappointment. It was a direct, catastrophic violation of the trust's conditions. As long as Sumit was with Jenny, that $2 million fortune was locked away, untouchable. And here is the truly sickening part. Sadhna and Anil knew. They knew everything. They had known about the child and the trust fund for years. The insider alleges that their relentless decade-long public campaign to destroy Jenny and Sumit's relationship had absolutely nothing to do with family honor, cultural differences, or their son's happiness. It was a cold, calculated, and desperate business strategy. It was a grotesque 10-year plot to force Sumit back into a respectable life, to meet the trust's conditions, so that they, as the boy's grandparents, could gain access to and control that $2 million fortune for their grandson. The source claims Sadhna and Anil were not just aware, they were active participants in the scheme. They had been financially supporting Sumit's first wife for years, coaching her, advising her, and manipulating her into using the child as the ultimate leverage, a pawn in their monstrous game. Every tear Sadhna shed on television, every angry outburst from Anil, every threat, every ultimatum, it was all a performance. A carefully rehearsed act in a long con designed to seize a fortune. They weren't trying to save their son, they were trying to cash him in. But the depravity doesn't end there. The insider dropped one final horrifying bombshell, the ultimate twist in a story already drowning in deception. Sumit himself has never met the child. He has never held him, never spoken to him. Because for the last 9 years, Sumit was led to believe the child wasn't his. According to the paralegal's report, when Sumit and his first wife separated after their brief, miserable arranged marriage, she reached out to him and told him she was pregnant. But before Sumit could even process this, his own parents, Sadhna and Anil, intervened. They sat their son down and told him it was a lie, a desperate, manipulative trick to trap him in a loveless marriage he was trying to escape. They convinced him she was trying to ruin his life, to prevent him from being with Jenny. They told him, "She is lying. It is not your baby. Cut off all contact. She is trying to destroy you." They deliberately and systematically isolated him from the situation, poisoning his mind against his ex-wife and the very idea of a child. All the while, behind his back, they were secretly cultivating a relationship with the child and his mother, positioning themselves as the loving, doting grandparents, all in service of their plot to get the money. Sumit is now being crucified in the court of public opinion, painted as a deadbeat dad for abandoning a son he was meticulously gaslit into believing never existed by his own mother and father. The sheer breathtaking cruelty of it is almost too much to process. They convinced their son he was the target of a scam, while they were the ones running a far bigger one against him. They preyed on his vulnerability, on his desire to escape a forced marriage, and on his love for Jenny. They used his emotions as a shield to hide their own greed. They let the world think they were protecting their family's honor, when they were actually orchestrating its complete and utter moral collapse. For 10 years, Sumit thought he was fighting his parents for his right to love. In reality, he was fighting a silent, invisible war against their insatiable greed, and he never even knew he was on the battlefield. He was a pawn. The ex-wife was a pawn. And the little boy, the supposed center of this entire conflict, was the biggest pawn of all, a human key to a $2 million vault. This brings us to the present day, to the lawsuit that blew the lid off this entire conspiracy. Bankrolled by Sadhna and Anil, Sumit's first wife filed a devastating lawsuit in family court. On the surface, it looked like a mother's righteous plea. She was suing for sole legal and physical custody, and she was demanding that Sumit formally and legally relinquish all of his paternal rights. Her legal argument, crafted by Sumit's parents, was that his unstable and culturally inappropriate marriage to Jenny Slatton was proof of his unfitness as a father. She claimed he was a man living a life of Western decadence, under the influence of an older woman, and that his lifestyle was a danger to the child's traditional upbringing. This wasn't just about custody, it was the final, critical move in their decade-long chess game. If a court officially declared Sumit an unfit father and severed his rights, they could then take that judgment to the trust administrators. It would be their proof, their legal key. They could argue that with the biological father legally removed from the picture, they, the devoted grandparents, were the rightful guardians to oversee the child's inheritance. The $2 million would finally be within their grasp. Sumit was blindsided. He was served with papers accusing him of being an unfit father to a child his parents swore wasn't his. He was being sued by a woman his parents told him was a liar, with his parents funding her legal team. The betrayal was absolute, a vortex of lies from which there seemed to be no escape. Imagine the feeling. The people who raised you, who you trusted implicitly, have not only lied to you for a decade, but have now publicly aligned with your enemies to destroy your reputation and marriage, all for money. Furious, cornered, and with his life with Jenny on the line, Sumit realized he had only one card left to play, one single path to the truth. His legal team responded to the lawsuit with a stunning countermove. Sumit agreed to their demands, but with one non-negotiable condition. He would submit to a court-ordered, legally binding DNA test. He declared in a sworn affidavit that if the test proved he was the father, he would immediately cease all efforts to relinquish his rights and would instead fight for full custody, vowing to expose the conspiracy against him. But he added, if he was not the father, he would pursue every legal avenue to ensure that his accusers, his ex-wife, and his own parents, would face the full consequences for their malicious campaign of lies. The stage was set for a courtroom showdown of epic proportions. The media was in a frenzy. The day the results were to be revealed, the courtroom was packed. Jenny was by Sumit's side, her face a mask of anxious determination. Across the aisle sat his first wife, flanked by Sadhna and Anil, their expressions a mixture of feigned piety and nervous anticipation. They believed they had him trapped. If the test was positive, they would use his life with Jenny to have him declared unfit, unlocking the trust. They likely never even considered the alternative. They had built their entire 10-year plan on the foundation of this one truth, that the boy was Sumit's son. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman, entered the chamber. The room fell silent. She held a single sealed envelope in her hand. She spoke of the gravity of the case, of the life of a child hanging in the balance, of the serious accusations of parental unfitness. Then she opened the envelope. She stared at the single sheet of paper for a long, agonizing moment. She looked up over her glasses, first at Sumit's ex-wife and his parents, and then at Sumit. The air in the courtroom was so thick you could barely breathe. And then she delivered the verdict that would change everything. The DNA test was negative. Probability of paternity, 0%. Sumit is not the father. The words hung in the air for a split second before chaos erupted. It was a detonation of truth, a bombshell that vaporized a decade of meticulously constructed lies. The boy who looked so much like Sumit, the secret grandson, the justification for a family's decade of cruelty, it was all a fraud, a complete and utter fraud. Sumit's ex-wife let out a gasp, her face draining of all color. Sadhna and Anil froze, their masks of aggrieved righteousness shattering into a million pieces, revealing the raw, ugly greed beneath. They looked at each other not with confusion, but with the dawning horror of co-conspirators whose perfect crime had just spectacularly imploded. Sumit stared straight ahead, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. Not a tear of sadness, but a tear of pure, unadulterated vindication. Jenny grabbed his hand, her own eyes wide with a mixture of shock, relief, and rage. The entire story, the secret son that set the internet on fire, the family's noble fight for their grandson, the very premise of the lawsuit, was a lie. Not just a lie, but a weapon. A weapon they had used to torture Sumit and Jenny for 10 years. A weapon they had aimed at a $2 million prize. And it had just backfired in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. The judge was visibly, palpably enraged. Her voice, which had been measured and calm, now dripped with ice-cold fury. She slammed her gavel down, silencing the murmurs that had erupted throughout the courtroom. She looked directly at Sadhna, Anil, and Sumit's first wife. And what followed was not just an illegal ruling, but a verbal dismantling of their entire character. She called their actions a new level of moral depravity. She accused them of perpetrating a conspiracy to defraud a man of his life, his reputation, and his peace. She spoke of the emotional terrorism they had inflicted upon their own son, holding the specter of a non-existent child over his head for their own financial gain. She dismissed the paternity and custody case with extreme prejudice, meaning it could never be filed again. But she didn't stop there. In an unprecedented move from the bench, she announced that she was immediately referring to all three of them, Sadhna, Anil, and Sumit's first wife, for criminal investigation. She cited a laundry list of potential charges: conspiracy to commit fraud, perjury for the false statements made in their court filings, and malicious prosecution. The judge made it clear, this was not just a family dispute gone wrong. This was a criminal enterprise, and she was going to ensure they were held accountable. The victory for Jenny and Sumit was absolute, but their fight was not over. Armed with the court's ruling and the judge's scathing indictment, they immediately filed a countersuit. They sued Sadhna, Anil, and the ex-wife for malicious prosecution, defamation of character, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Their lawsuit detailed the decade of torment, the public humiliation, the emotional anguish, and the calculated fraudulent scheme to steal $2 million. Given the DNA evidence and the judge's criminal referral, the case was a slam dunk. The court moved with lightning speed. There was no lengthy trial. The defendants, facing imminent criminal charges and undeniable evidence, had no defense. The court swiftly ruled in favor of Jenny and Sumit, awarding them a massive judgment for damages. The final figure? $750,000. It was a stunning reversal of fortune. The parents who had schemed for years to get their hands on $2 million were now legally ordered to pay their son and his wife nearly $1 million for the pain they had caused. The fallout was catastrophic and swift, a chain reaction of ruin that Sadhna and Anil had ignited themselves. The final blow came not from Sumit, but from the family of his first wife. The wealthy, powerful family who had set up the trust fund in the first place were now aware of the staggering fraud their own daughter had perpetuated in collusion with the Singhs. They were humiliated and furious that their family name and fortune had been used as the centerpiece of a criminal conspiracy. They immediately launched their own massive lawsuit against their daughter and against Sadhna and Anil. Their goal was twofold. First, to protect the integrity of the trust and ensure the actual biological father of the child was identified. And second, to financially obliterate the people who had tried to fraudulently access their money. This new lawsuit was the nail in the coffin. Sadhna and Anil were now fighting a war on two fronts: a criminal investigation on one side and two multi-million-dollar civil suits on the other. They were facing financial ruin, public disgrace, and the very real possibility of prison time. Their decade-long gamble for a fortune had ended in complete and total disaster. They had lost everything: their money, their reputation, their standing in the community, and, most devastatingly, their son. They had traded their child's love and happiness for a lottery ticket, and in the end, they discovered it was blank. The house of lies they had so carefully constructed over 10 years had come crashing down, burying them under the rubble of their own greed. The silence in the aftermath of that courtroom verdict was louder than any of Sadhna's screams had ever been. As Jenny and Sumit walked out of the courthouse, they were engulfed in a blinding storm of flashing cameras and shouted questions. But for them, the world was moving in slow motion. The noise was a distant hum, the frantic energy of the press corps a blurry watercolor painting. They didn't see the individual faces or hear the specific questions. They were in a bubble of shared shock, a sacred space carved out of the wreckage of a decade-long lie. The truth hadn't just set them free. It had fundamentally rewired their reality. Every memory, every argument, every tear shed over the last 10 years now had to be re-examined, re-cataloged, and refelt through this new, horrifying prism. The parents Sumit had fought, appeased, and agonized over simply didn't exist. They were fictional characters, played by two actors whose only motivation was a script written by greed. The car ride back to their apartment was a journey through a muted landscape. Jenny held Sumit's hand, her thumb stroking his knuckles, the only anchor in a sea of emotional chaos. Sumit just stared out the window, his expression not of triumph, but of profound, hollow grief. He wasn't just processing the victory, he was mourning the loss of his family. Not their future loss, but the realization that he had already lost them a decade ago. He just hadn't known it. He was grieving the mother who would hold him and tell him she loved him, all the while knowing she was secretly plotting his social and emotional destruction for profit. He was grieving the father whose stoic disapproval he had always tried to overcome, now understanding that disapproval wasn't rooted in tradition, but in a cold, hard financial calculation. He had spent 10 years trying to earn the love and respect of two people who saw him not as a son, but as a faulty ATM that needed to be violently shaken to dispense cash. How do you even begin to comprehend that level of betrayal? It's a psychological wound so deep, there is no frame of reference for it. It is the ultimate gaslighting. Your entire emotional history becomes a crime scene, and your parents are the perpetrators. As they sat in their living room, the room that had been the stage for so much of their televised pain, the memories began to flood in, now tainted and grotesque. Think back to when Sadhna and Anil moved in with them. We all saw it as a desperate, overbearing, but perhaps understandable move by parents terrified of losing their son. We debated whether Jenny was being patient enough, whether Sumit was standing up for her enough. Now look at it again. Sadhna wasn't there as a mother-in-law from hell. She was there as a warden, a spy. She was there to monitor the asset, her constant interference, her attempts to drive a wedge between them, her endless critiques of Jenny. It wasn't about cultural purity. It was about stress testing the relationship. She was applying pressure, hoping to create cracks, hoping to force a breakup so that her son, the key to the trust fund, would come back under her control. She was gathering intelligence, looking for weaknesses she could report back to her co-conspirators. Her presence in their home was not an act of love. It was an act of corporate espionage disguised as family drama. And what about the infamous astrologer, the man who so conveniently declared that Jenny and Sumit's marriage was an impossibility, that the stars themselves were aligned against them, causing Sadhna to have a full-blown theatrical meltdown? We all thought, wow, this is how deeply they believe in their traditions. We were fools. The insider's report strongly suggests that the astrologer was just another pawn, likely paid off by Sadhna and Anil. He wasn't reading the stars, he was reading a script. His dire predictions weren't cosmic warnings. They were carefully crafted lines in their long-running play, designed to create a sense of hopelessness, to make their unions seem not just culturally difficult, but cosmically doomed. It was psychological warfare. They were using the weight of religion and destiny as a weapon to crush their son's spirit, to make him believe that fighting for Jenny was fighting against God himself. Also, he would give up, return to the fold, and make them all very, very rich. Every single threat to disown him now takes on a chilling new meaning. When Anil looked his son in the eye and threatened to ostracize him from the family forever, it wasn't a father's heartbreak speaking. It was a business partner issuing a final offer. It was a threat. Comply with the terms of our deal, or we will liquidate your emotional assets. Their love was never unconditional. It was a commodity, and it had a price tag of $2 million. Sumit's refusal to bend, his unwavering commitment to Jenny, wasn't just a romantic rebellion. It was, in their eyes, a catastrophic business failure. He was refusing to close the most important deal of their lives. The pain they displayed was not the pain of parents losing a son, it was the fury of investors watching their stock plummet. The slow, agonizing process of Sumit's divorce from his first wife can now be seen for what it was, a masterclass in manipulation. Sadhna and Anil were playing both sides. To Sumit, they were the reluctant helpers, the parents who disapproved but were helping him clean up his mess. In reality, they were secretly in league with the other side, funding and advising his ex-wife. They were deliberately dragging out the process, using it as another point of leverage, another tool to wear Jenny and Sumit down. They likely coached the ex-wife on what to say, how to act, how to maximize the financial and emotional damage. They were the puppet masters, and their son and his ex-wife were just marionettes dancing on the strings of their greed. They extended his suffering, hoping that the endless legal battles, the financial strain, and the emotional exhaustion would finally be the thing that broke him, the thing that would send him crawling back to them, defeated and compliant. This revelation completely reframed Sumit's character. For years, many in the audience saw him as weak, indecisive, a man who couldn't stand up to his parents. We judged him for not being more forceful, for trying to appease them, for the years he spent lying about his relationship with Jenny. But we were judging a man who was fighting a battle we couldn't see. He wasn't just fighting his parents' disapproval, he was unknowingly fighting a covert psychological operation being waged against him by the two people on Earth he was programmed to trust. He wasn't weak. He was being systematically broken down. He was being gaslit on a scale that is almost unimaginable. He was made to feel that his love for Jenny was the source of all his family's pain, that his happiness was the cause of his mother's sickness and his father's shame. He carried that guilt for a decade. The weight of that manufactured guilt would crush anyone. The fact that he withstood it, the fact that he ultimately chose Jenny over and over again in the face of that immense, unseen pressure, is not a sign of weakness. It is a testament to a strength that is almost superhuman. He wasn't a man caught between two worlds. He was a prisoner of war in his own family, and he didn't even know a war was being fought. Jenny, too, is cast in a new light. She was never just the older American woman naive to Indian culture. She was the one person who saw through the facade. She always knew something was fundamentally wrong. She felt the malice behind Sadhna's fake smiles. She sensed the transactional nature of their family dynamics. She was the one who kept telling Sumit, "They will never accept me. This isn't just about culture." She was right, but even she could not have possibly imagined the scale or the motive of the deception. For 10 years, she endured being called a homewrecker, a cradle robber, an evil influence. She was publicly shamed and privately tormented. She gave up her home, her country, her financial security, and her family to be with the man she loved, all while being painted as the villain in a story whose plot she never understood. This court case is her ultimate vindication. It proves that she wasn't the problem. The age gap was never the problem. The cultural difference was never the problem. The problem was a rot of greed that had festered in the heart of the Singh family long before she ever arrived. Her love for Sumit wasn't the destructive force in the story. It was the only real, honest thing in a universe of lies. It was the lighthouse that guided Sumit through a storm he didn't know he was in. As the news of the verdict went global, the public reckoning was seismic. The viral TikTok that started it all vanished. The account was deleted, the woman who claimed to be a relative disappearing back into the digital ether, leaving behind the tantalizing question of whether she was a willing participant in the scheme or just another pawn used to launch the opening salvo. News outlets that had run sensational headlines condemning Sumit were now forced to print stunning retractions. The narrative didn't just shift, it underwent a violent 180-degree reversal. Overnight, Sumit went from being one of the franchise's most controversial figures to its most tragic victim. The wave of public sympathy was overwhelming. Online forums and social media were flooded with messages of support for Jenny and Sumit and pure, unadulterated venom for Sadhna and Anil. Fans went back through old seasons, creating compilation videos of every lie, every moment of manipulation, now recontextualized with the horrifying truth. Sadhna's crocodile tears, once seen as the genuine pain of a mother, were now mocked as amateur theatrics. Anil's stern lectures on honor were ridiculed as the hypocritical ramblings of a common thief. They had become, in the space of a single news cycle, the most hated figures in reality television history, their villainy surpassing that of any cast member who had come before them. For Sadhna and Anil, the downfall was not a gentle slope, but a plunge off a cliff. The criminal investigation moved forward with terrifying speed. Faced with irrefutable evidence of perjury and conspiracy, they were arrested. The images of them being led away in handcuffs were broadcast across the globe, a stunning, humiliating end to their reign of domestic terror. Their community, which values reputation and family honor above all else, turned on them completely. They were pariahs, their names synonymous with shame and greed. The $750,000 judgment from Sumit's lawsuit forced them to sell their home and liquidate their assets. They were financially wiped out. The subsequent lawsuit from the ex-wife's family ensured they would spend the rest of their lives buried in legal debt, but the financial ruin was secondary to the social and familial annihilation. They had schemed to gain a fortune and a grandson, and in the end, they were left with nothing. No money, no respect, and no son. The silence from Sumit was their ultimate punishment. He didn't scream, he didn't rage. He simply cut them out of his life, a surgical removal of a cancer that had been poisoning him for years. Their existence was erased from his, a final quiet act of self-preservation. And what of the boy, the innocent child at the center of this grotesque charade? The family of Sumit's first wife, in their own effort to mitigate the damage, moved to protect him. They used their considerable resources to shield him from the media circus and to legally identify his biological father, ensuring the $2 million trust would go to its rightful beneficiary. In a strange and tragic way, the implosion of the scheme was the best thing that could have happened for him. He was freed from a life of being used as a bargaining chip by people who saw him not as a child to be loved, but as a living, breathing bank account. Now, Jenny and Sumit are free. For the first time in their relationship, truly and completely free. The cloud of parental disapproval that has hung over them for a decade has dissipated, revealed to be nothing more than a smog of greed. The $750,000 they won is not just money, it is a form of justice. It's a reparation payment for a decade of stolen peace. It's the seed money for a new life, a life built on their own terms, far from the wreckage of Sumit's family. They can travel without guilt. They can live without looking over their shoulder. They can finally, simply be. Their love story, which many dismissed as a foolish fantasy, has been forged in a fire that would have incinerated most relationships. They survived lies, manipulation, public shaming, and a conspiracy of breathtaking cruelty, and they survived it together. They have proven that their bond was the one thing in this entire sordid affair that was real. Which brings us to the final, impossible question. It's a question that goes to the very core of what it means to be human, to love, to forgive. After your own parents orchestrate a decade-long conspiracy to destroy your life, your marriage, and your reputation. After they fake a grandchild to steal $2 million, after they gaslight you into believing you are the source of all their pain, when in reality they are the architects of yours. Is there any path back? Can forgiveness even exist in the same universe as a betrayal of this magnitude? Or is the only sane, healthy response to cut them out of your life forever, to treat them as the strangers they proved themselves to be? I need you to think about it. Really think about it. What would you do? Tell me your answer in the comments below.